Thank you. I think I will use the word open a couple of times as well. I think that if I have a clicker today, I would really go into competition about the word open. So it's like OpenStack, open source, open infrastructure. This is something. I mean, I'm coming a bit from the outside. I mean, I've been into infrastructure like 10 years ago, and at that time I was looking at different solutions, and I was looking at OpenStack at that time as well, and I simply decided myself to another technology. If I would do the same thing over again, I think I would switch to OpenStack. So I think this is really something. I mean, you really have a great community. I think it's really great what you achieved so far. So thank you for having me. I'm Oliver Naegele from Frankfurt. I want to tell something about the trust anchor and the something that bridges the two technologies, so to say. I'm from the blockchain world, so I'm running my own company called Blockchain Helix. We're into digital identity. I'm one of the founders of the Blockchain Association Germany, heavily involved into these different definitions coming from the political side as well, because we really need some clearance on different aspects here. So I'm involved into something called GDPR. I guess you're familiar with this. Anyhow, how many technicians are in the room so that I have an idea? So, okay, so it's about 50%, and from the financial industry or from banking side or from customers, so to say. There's only one. I think maybe they're outside and buying something from the others. I don't know. About blockchain, I do not want to go into deep, but I mean, I just want to get you maybe on the key facts here. So it's mainly like 4 features that we really have here. So it's about a P2P system that is synchronizing in between nodes. The other thing is what we're using there is strong encryption. We're using SSH 256 encryption there. We're using a public and private key pair, as you might know. I guess a lot of you have wallets anyhow, and got anyhow into crypto as well, I guess. The other thing is simply that we have a distributed database. From a database perspective, it's like one of the worst databases ever, because the block size is simply so small that you simply cannot store any binaries in there. So what we do there mainly in the blockchain sphere, that we combine different technologies here. So it's a technology called IPFS, for instance, that you can really store binaries as well. And you normally combine this, even with big data databases, you can combine this in between. And the other thing is, as we're using blockchain technology, it is irreversible and it's tamper-proof. And this is in between all these different aspects, we're building blocks. And the idea about this is to build up a new toolbox set that we have having something that you simply, you're providing a truth in time, and this is simply not reversible. So with this, you can build up what we call a programmable trust. And in between what you're providing with OpenStack as a programmable infrastructure, so to say, and what we're doing with blockchain technology, what we call a programmable trust here, there is a kind of a, there's a link, you know. So blockchain cannot run on its own. So we always need to have some infrastructure. And you need to understand that blockchain coming from something that is highly dependent on infrastructure, on open source, sorry, because we simply need trust. So we have a certain examples in the industry right now that simply is getting down from the user acceptance because they're not giving their code into open source. So we have this, for instance, with IOTA. They have a certain consensus algorithm, and they have certain encryption that they do not show for public. So there's always some kind of a bad feeling about what it's really about. I mean, if you're into encryption, you have all these different types of elliptic curves, for instance, so you really need to know if it's really safe. So going to open source is something from the blockchain side. This is absolutely crucial. Yeah? And this is something where Ethereum is I think, a very good example what they're doing. You need to understand that coming from where blockchain started with Bitcoin and the underlying blockchain is like in 2008, early 2009. It's all started. And then it was really completely under the radar for years. And then it came up in this massive bullish ride that got up to $20,000 per Bitcoin. Is really, I mean, it's really ridiculous. But you need to understand that Ethereum it's founded in 2013, and right now Ethereum has like 25,000 nodes already on the planet, and we have about 50,000 developers per month that's coming new to the Ethereum world. So, I mean, you guys, you're in this space for so long. These guys are simply stepping in right now. I think it could be really a very clever thing as OpenStack is much more mature. All these things that you just learned of what Jonathan and Thierry is doing with this foundation stuff. This is something, if you're going into the press and reading something about the different problems that Ethereum has right now, is something that we see that you already solved in somehow. Maybe you do not have any competition in there. I don't know, because you need to understand that from the way it rises, the whole thing about blockchain, there was no industry supporting it, right? So what you have here normally, you have some kind of industry partners behind it, but in blockchain there was nothing. And the idea how it was all raised up was by ICOs. So coming from blockchain was something that's more a completely anarchic system. So it's nothing that really got into any kind of industry. It's like, okay, there's a cryptocurrency, but nobody cared about this. But coming to Ethereum, Ethereum was simply raised up by an ICO. So the market capitalization of Ethereum was something that simply got as an intrinsic value in itself. So an ICO, mainly to understand that you understand this, is the idea that you're selling your coins up front to a community and simply get liquidity in order to build up the whole system. And if you're seeing systems like EOS, for instance, so EOS did an ICO lately. It's like $5 billion, right? So, and they're simply starting with this. So this is a completely different approach. So this is why the development in blockchain is like with steroids, right? So what we see there is the innovation coming from blockchain is mainly fostered by everything that has to do with this liquidity coming from this ICO world. And this is because we just had a discussion yesterday about where's the use case in blockchain. There's always this, it's kind of a mystic thing. ICO is an intrinsic use case that is massive. I mean, it's like $1 billion use case. And it's fostering the whole innovation in this field. So I think coming from this idea behind it, there's no industry behind blockchain so far. I mean, there's Hyperledger, there's certain consortium from banks that are like the R3 consortium, but the main innovation is coming only from developers. It's only coming from the community itself. So there's really, and it's really highly dependent on open source in this case. And this is why we see that we have like two different main parts that we have in the blockchain sphere. Right now, you have all these public blockchains like Ethereum or Bitcoin. They are called permissionless because you can simply stand up a node and then it's up and running, and everybody can simply deploy to the network. The problem with this is if you're really thinking about getting this into serious business, we have very big problems very easily. So there was, for instance, one example from a company that actually used an Ethereum node. And there was some explicit material that was put on the blockchain, right? So what can you do? I mean, they're running this node, so they are data providers, so they are data processors coming from law. And there was explicit materials on it because it is irreversible. It's not doable that this content can somehow vanish. And then you have a lot of different questions coming from regulatory side as well, because you do not know if you're into a network where certain information are mined or wherever in China, where this the way that they're simply processing this data is not complying to the law or the regulation. So this is something that we see a huge trend going into permissioned blockchain. The idea behind a permissioned blockchain is mainly to go into a masternode system, so you know all these nodes, you have a certain governance around this, and with this governance, of course, you do not need to do all this incentivation of the network itself, called mining. I guess you're familiar with mining. I mean, I think the Nordics is one of the biggest mining places on the world. It's China and the Nordics because of the low energy costs. But with a permission blockchain, you can set up a system where you have governance, where you can still have enough freedom to operate in between all these different parties. And a permission blockchain need to live somewhere. Yeah? A permissionless blockchain, you have no idea. I mean, it's all over the place. And a permissionless blockchain is mainly about GPU and ASICs computing just to get mining power and to have some kind of incentivation. This is the main idea behind permissionless blockchain. But a permission blockchain, it really needs to live somewhere. And this is why I believe that OpenStack is really a very good partner in order to get into this play with industry partners, blockchain side, and to have an infrastructure that is highly operated, that is supported well, that we have, as you already said, a very good integration, continuous integration, and to foster this innovation that we need in this space to bring this to industry. Right? So the main thing that we're right now struggling with in the blockchain world is that these large companies, they simply, all these companies right now, they have blockchain on their landscape. So all of them have a small team. But I mean, for instance, in Germany, the biggest team is from Deutsche Bahn, so the railway company. They have like 25 developers, right? And this is next to nothing. If you combine this with Korea, for instance, they have startups there with 300 developers. So it's really a completely different thing. But what we need here is that these companies, they need to have some kind of test bed. They need to have some kind of productive system. And this is why the OpenStack Foundation and the way to simply have the idea of not blockchain as a service, but being a partner of the blockchain industry, of these blockchain companies, and simply get in between the relationship, the consortium of different industry partners, the infrastructure provider, and the guys that are actually doing the use cases built on, for instance, DApps or any kind of different services. I think this is something that is highly needed in the market because none of these companies can do anything about this. And if you're looking at the major pain points coming from the companies, it's mainly about the internal audits. Yeah, if you need to run a blockchain on behalf of the company itself, like a bank, it's a huge pain point if you're going to discuss this with the compliance officers and with others there. So. I was asked to show some examples why or how these two different technologies somehow spin together. One of them is a trustful deployment. So of course you can run your own JIT system. We do this as well, and of course you can use MD5 hashes, and you have a certain amount of security that this software is somehow not leaked by anybody. But you have no record keeping that is really safe. Yeah, so what you can easily do, and there's one of the use cases that already is in production about airplanes. So you have a certain software that you have to upload on these planes. So how do you know that this software is in the way that it's used to be? If there's nobody in between that simply changed something. So coming from blockchain technology, as this this idea that you have a software and you have an MD5 hash, and you can easily prove that this MD5 hash is, of course, related to this piece of software, and you're using this MD5 hash in a record keeping, in a record that is based on a blockchain, you can easily tell that this information is true. So you have a life cycle management in between that is highly trustful. So this is something that we already see in the industry, and I think coming from the way what you're doing, guys, with deploying of the software to all these infrastructures, it's nearly the same thing. So I think this is something that could be really interesting in order to set up a pilot here and to start this. And the other thing is about identity management. I mean, this is one of my topics. I was looking at these different projects, found this Keystone that is using as an identity management on behalf of the OpenStack. The idea of Keystone is, yeah, of course, it's more like it's related to all these LDAP and active management, but our idea of a digital identity is more broader. So we believe that an identity can be universal. So you only have an identity that is on behalf of a person, and you can use it all over the place. So coming from an OpenID and OAuth 2 interfaces, you could easily use the technology from an ID that is bound and that is trustful based on, for instance, our system or an identity system that is based on blockchain, in order to bridge this with any kind of user interface or any kind of user management coming from the OpenStack world. And I want to tell a bit about digital identity there as well. I mean, we're coming a bit from the idea that if we want to create a web that we all agreed on and we would have the chance to do it over again, what you would normally do there is to sit back and think what would be the first thing that you would need in order to make it secure, make it convenient, make it in the way that you have the highest acceptance. And then you would, of course, start with the user itself, yeah? Because what we have right now with Web 2.0 is that you have accounts all over the place, right? So we have these what we call GAFA. It's like Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon. We're adding a second A with Alibaba. So what we have here is all these accounts, they have nothing to do with the person itself. So you have accounts all over the place, like every one of us. I guess you maybe even more than normal people have about 120 accounts all over the place. Yeah, and of course, right now the game that Facebook is doing, of course, is getting into a single sign-on. You can think of whatever you want, but the idea that Facebook is connecting your identity with different services and use this on their behalf is something, if you're looking for the idea of GDPR, is very controversial. So with this, we think that a self-sovereign identity is something that is highly needed. So an identity that is belonging to you, that you can hook up every information that is on your behalf and give only the acceptance to certain information in between different parties that you simply do business with. And this can be anything. It can be the cigarette vendor as well, that you simply comply that you're over 18 or whatever age you need for a certain business. So the idea is to have a user-centric design here, to set the person in the center and have everything around this. So it's like a B2B2C approach where we have identity services, data services as well. And of course, as we're dealing with blockchain and crypto, you always have the payment services in between. Yeah? I mean, you cannot steer a system without any kind of payment, even if it's micropayment. You need this. Yeah? Think of the idea of email services. Way back then, nobody thought of spam. Yeah? There are a lot of different blockchain services and protocols right now that do not have any micropayment in between. So what happens there, it's pretty easy. They got completely spammed all over the place because, I mean, the creativity of different hackers is really, I can tell you, this is really ridiculous. So it simply needs like 2 or 3 weeks and the whole system explodes. Right? So if you want to set up a system that is really sustainable, you always need micropayment. And going to micropayment, you always need some kind of digital cash, some kind of digital currency. And this is where we're at with cryptocurrencies. Yeah. I highly believe that we have some kind of digital euro in the near future. Near future can be like 8 years, can be like 10 years, but in terms of these different entities, this is nearby. But this is really important in order to have a system that you can relate to, because in between all these different elements, if we're going into something that we call a digital society or a digital economic system, you need to have this incentivation in between. Yeah, you cannot relate to, you have to pay this in advance, you have to pay this by credit card or something. This will not work anyhow. This simply will not work. Yeah, think about all these expenses that you have. So you really need to have this included into such a system. And the only way that this can be solved, this what we call it to solve the double spending problem. This is the main idea behind Bitcoin. This is something that only blockchain can do. You can call it anything, but in this case, it's called blockchain. But others call it DLT systems. So in between, we have services, and outside of these services, we have these B2B partners, because we really believe a lot into these consortium. So as I see that Nordics or there was another guy. Everybody is going into consortium right now, because to differentiate in between and be more powerful and to have a certain piece of the cake, so to say, this is really the thing to go. So the main idea is to have trusted partners in order to have these different nodes laid out. So this is why we build up our system based on a stable coin, that is the ID coin, and we have a volatile coin, because we're right now doing an ICO with a product that's called Helix Orange. So the idea, of course, is to have from the economic side, if you need to be really to have a clear business model, you need to have a stable coin. So this is something that, for instance, in the world of Ethereum, that is simply missing. This is why we need to shift to permission to private blockchains at the moment. Otherwise, it cannot be related to industry, because they really need to have a stable coin. And then, yeah, we're using actually Docker at the moment a lot. So we started a project a long time ago where we used a system that is kind of a microserver. So it's something that's not really related to OpenStack, but we did a microserver that was completely a blockchain in a box, so it's more of a lab system. You can simply push the button, and then you have a blockchain with a lot of nodes with all the different aspects that you need in order to showcase this to industry, or to do some kind of hackathons, or to have a system for labs. So this is something where we started. This is why we really got into Docker containers very early. We're right now shifting to Kubernetes, and we highly believe that we will go for OpenStack. And this is why, for instance, Johan invited me. Thank you, Johan, because we have a couple of things right now in discussion with City Network in order to bring compliance to the infrastructure for our side as well there, because what we see in the discussion with the industry, compliance officers are mainly showstoppers if we're talking to different parties there. So the idea from our side is mainly we have a mobile layer where we simply having these cryptographic key pairs like public and private keys, getting this to your smartphone in order to use this for attestation for any kind of request that you have concerning your digital identity. And with this, we can span up an identity service or an identity layer, what we call, pretty easily, and use this on behalf of the user because as you're using a cryptographic key pair and we're really encrypting this data, it's really impossible for anybody else to read this. Yeah? And by doing so, of course, we're introducing big data databases as well because, I mean, blockchain is simply not a good way to store personal data, so never do this. It's really important. And in between, we have a couple of different other technology layers there. So coming from this, what we're building there right now is mainly the idea to have, of course, compliance, because compliance, I mean, I do not need to tell you if you ever talk to somebody else from, of course, the banking side as well. If you're not compliant in the way that you're acting with personal data, you're simply gone. So this is what we need, and of course, we need a governance. So this is something if we thinking of a system like Ethereum or any kind of decentralized, autonomous organizations. There's no governance. There's maybe there are voting rights or something, but there's normally no governance. So this is something that we need, and we strongly believe that it's more a roadmap to certain more public clouds. But right now, I think that the industry and the whole landscape is simply not ready for this. So we believe in a roadmap that we have like the next 5 years, we will go for permissioned blockchains, and then we will go as we can expand the amount of nodes and we'll give this to the public more. We can simply have this as a roadmap to a more global and a more public approach there. And by doing this, what we're doing is we're running a masternode system. A masternode system. I just had a discussion with somebody on the plane, and they're running a system right now. It's completely written in C that is able to do 5,000 transactions per second. Yeah, so I guess you're familiar that Bitcoin is like. It's like a gong every 10 minutes, so to say. It's really bad from transaction side. But 5,000 transactions are already doable. There are a couple of other projects telling that they already reached like 1.5 millions. To be honest, I was looking at their code and this was really scam. So you really need to be very, very cautious about what they're telling, because there's normally a huge amount of money involved in between all these parties. So it's very, the whole industry, the whole blockchain industry really has a high reputation crisis at the moment. So you really have to look deep into everything that you see. So, but 5,000 transactions, something that we can do with this masternode system as well. And with 5,000 transactions, they showed me a video. What they're doing, it's like a remote control, and then they have a small like a remote controlled car with a microcomputer on top of it, and they can actually steer the whole vehicle just like a normal remote control car. But what they do in between, every command that they're giving them, this car, is a transaction actually with a block that is telling this car what he should do or what this car should do. Yeah, and it's running completely without any problem. So the funny thing here is, I mean, this car has nothing to do with blockchain anyhow. Yeah, but they were going to an investor showing this, like this toy, and I mean they're really freaked out, right? So this is the way it goes in this industry. And if you're thinking about transactions from any kind of idea what you have, like financial services, like any kind of transaction to the internet, a lot of people telling that Ethereum or blockchain will be like the new internet. If you're going into higher transaction, then you can really absolutely do everything with this system. And as the system is trustful, you really have a high advantage over all these other systems here. So what we do mainly is to build up this infrastructure right now, based on a proof of authority consensus. Is something that I guess you know that Bitcoin, for instance, has an energy consumption of like Ireland, right? So it's really considering energy consumption is really it's really bad. So concerning a system that you do not need mining because you have the incentivization coming from the industry partners, you simply do not need this. And so the whole myths about blockchain that it always has to be like this, it always is energy consumption is simply wrong. Yeah, so you can easily do different consensus mechanisms here and be fast, be energy efficient, and you can spend this up. But it is a permission blockchain in this case. Otherwise, you simply, at this moment in time, you simply need a proof of work in order to simply be trustful. So I think I'm running out of time. Thanks a lot. If there's any questions, I'm still here, so or maybe you have a question right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. Okay, we have time for a quick question for Oliver. Any questions in the room? Last chance? All right. Thank you again, Oliver. Thank you.
Thank you.